Here with all of you. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I think Alicia made a great introduction, and I will share a little bit more about who I am and the work that I do, but I want to start by saying I'm not an expert here. I'm here sort of as a community member and somebody who knows some about what I'm going to share tonight. And I hope that we'll have some time where we can be in conversation with each other. We can ask questions. We can get curious about what's happening in the state of Maine as it relates to hunger, what's happening here in our community, and just enjoy sort of being with each other and in this conversation. I do have a series of slides that I'm going to share just because I'm a visual learner and I love pictures and I love story. So I hope that you'll find a way to connect to what I have to offer this evening, either through pictures or story or some other way. And I think that's it. I think we'll just sort of jump right in. I'm fairly proficient at this point with Zoom technology, but forgive me, because even when you test it, in the moment that really matters is when it seems to want to be tricky. So if it's tricky, then we'll just be patient until it works itself out. So let's see here. I do have to say before I put up this slide, because I'm not going to see all your beautiful faces, that I am so happy to see you, Murphy. I see you knitting away there, and it has been far too long since I've seen you, and I know that you're making something fabulous. So I'm just happy to see your face this evening. All right, so let's see here. I'm gonna pull up some slides and we'll be on our way. All right. So I'm going to talk with you a little bit tonight about the work that I do on two fronts. I wear two hats. One is that I work for Good Shepherd Foodbank, which is the largest hunger relief organization in the state of Maine. And the second is that I am the co-founder of the Twin Villages Foodbank Farm here in Mid-Coast, Maine. So my hope is that at the end of the evening, you will have sort of a picture of what's happening across the state in Maine as it relates to hunger and food insecurity. And you'll feel excited about some of the stuff that's happening right here in Lincoln County to make sure that all of our neighbors have the food that they need for themselves and their families to thrive. So as I mentioned when I started, my name is Meg Taft. I use she, her pronouns. And I am the Vice President for Equity and Impact at Good Shepherd Foodbank. And I am also the co-founder of Twin Villages Foodbank Farm. The Foodbank Farm is located in Damariscotta, and we operate in partnership with Coastal Rivers Conservation Trust. I want to share a little bit about myself. First of all, I'm joining you all today from the unceded territories of the Wabanaki Confederacy in what we now call Maine. I was born and raised in Connecticut. And if you have ever traveled the I-84 corridor, and if you have ever been to Ryan's Deli, which I find is a pretty popular landmark for people who travel I-84, then you will know my home. I am so I am so delighted that tonight my parents are here, that they figured out the technology to get Zoom and they're joining us from Connecticut. And I thought at first that I would just make a crack about sometimes their challenges with technology, particularly my dad's, but then I thought that I would instead come from a place of gratitude and share one, how grateful I am that they cared enough and that they figured out how to be with us tonight. And to say that when I talk about my work, it is because of the values that my parents instilled in me. And I wouldn't be doing what I get to do every day without what they offered me growing up. And that was the value and the appreciation and the ability and the access to do work that I love and to do it with all of my heart. And so I want to thank and appreciate them for being here with us tonight and for fostering the way that I see the world, and which has led me to do the work that I do. I also will share that I live over in Alna with my partner, Sarah, and our 8-year-old daughter, Adley. So that's a little bit about me. What I want to talk with you all about tonight is to give a little bit of context for what the Good Shepherd Food Bank is, the work that we do. We'll start off with a practice that we hold dear to our hearts at the food bank with a land acknowledgement statement. I'll talk a little bit about hunger in Maine. There's so much, and it's really quite a complex picture. So my goal is not to tell you all of the things, but to share some big picture understandings of what the landscape looks like here in Maine. And I'm really happy I created the presentation tonight with lots of links so that if I share it with Alicia and others are curious, you can have a copy of the presentation and then you can click around and you can get all of the detail that you want. But hopefully during the question session, there will be time for us to answer questions and to be in conversation with each other. Because of my role at the food bank, specific to looking at equity, we'll talk a little bit about the racial and ethnic demographics of hunger here in Maine, and what the food bank is doing, both in terms of addressing hunger today, as well as looking long-term in terms of what is needed to create real systemic change so that we can move people out of poverty and into greater food security. And then I'll end with talking about the work that my partner and I lead here on the local level with the Twin Villages Food Bank Farm. So I'll start by saying that a little bit about Good Shepherd Food Bank is that we are the largest hunger relief organization in Maine. And we support the entire state through a 600 partner network. And partners include food pantries, meal sites, school sites, healthcare centers, and elder programs. The food bank also supports a network of partners with capacity building and innovation grants. So we not only distribute food across the state through that partner network, but annually we distribute just over $4 million in grants to partner organizations so that they can build their capacity, they can build their infrastructure to do this work well and with dignity in the community. Last year, the food bank distributed 29 million meals. And if you're wondering how we know how many meals, we distribute. Feeding America, which is the national organization that we connect with, defines a meal as 1.2 pounds of food. And so if you do the math there, we distribute about 35 million pounds of food in a year. We also look at the root causes of hunger. So what is fueling hunger? Why do people not have enough to eat? And we do that work through our advocacy efforts, our nutrition education, and strategic partnerships that we hold across the state. Our hope is that by 2025, all food insecure Mainers will have access to the nutritious and culturally relevant food they need when and where they need it. And if we can achieve that, we believe we will help stabilize the lives of people across the state and reduce the impact of hunger across Maine, making Maine a stronger and more resilient place to work. I want to take a moment and just tell you about this photo because it's beautiful. And this is, her name is Maria. She is part of Presente Maine, which is an organization here in Southern Maine, actually over in the Lewiston, Auburn area. And it is led by a woman named Crystal Crone, and they work with the Latino community and folks from the indigenous diaspora. So folks who have been removed from their native homelands, and they are working to restore traditional food practices. And we recently hosted an event out there, and Maria cooked much of that delicious food that you see on the table there. So at the food bank, as we continue to, let me see here. Part of my screen is blocked with pictures, and so it's hard for me to read what's on the slide. I know that there is a way to do this. Okay, so as we continue the work of centering equity across the food bank, we acknowledge the violent and forceful removal of tribal communities from their ancestral homelands across the state of Maine and the country. Taking the time to learn and talk about the history of oppressive and racist practices and policies is one way that we can shed light back into communities that have suffered the wounds of intergenerational trauma and attempted genocide, only to emerge as resilient survivors. And so I want to share with you, because I think the practice of land acknowledgement statements is not something that's widely known or understood. And so I have a short video that talks about the value of organizations having a land acknowledgement statement. So I'm going to play a short video for you, and then I'm going to read the food bank's land acknowledgement statement as a way to begin our time together. Okay. I'm going to do, I just have to toggle real quick, so just be patient. I am still here. Let's see. Okay.
That's it. Go ahead, lay down. Go ahead.
Thank you for listening. So I will share the land acknowledgement of Good Shepherd Food Bank by saying that Good Shepherd Food Bank of Maine recognizes that its work and the work of our partner network cannot achieve just and equitable outcomes without acknowledging that we stand on the unceded territory of the Wabanaki people, which includes the tribes of the Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, Abenaki, and Micmac people, and the impact that colonization, genocide, and displacement has had and continues to have on tribal populations living in their ancestral homeland in what is now called Maine. In acknowledging this, we recognize that the Wabanaki people in Maine are disproportionately impacted by food insecurity. According to a report issued by the Ending Hunger in Maine by 2030 initiative, 29.5% of the tribal population in Maine experiences food insecurity, above the national average of all US households, which is 10.2%, and even above the national average for Native American households of 27%. We recognize too the history of the water, the air, fish, wildlife, plants, and soils that have been hunted, gathered, fished, foraged, harvested, and stewarded sustainably by the tribes of the Wabanaki Confederacy for millennia. For thousands of years predating the arrival of European colonists, the people of the Dawnland relied on the soil, forests, rivers, lakes, and mountains of what we now call Maine for subsistence and food, spiritual, medicinal, economic, and recreational resources. All that we see and stand on for the Wabanaki people nourished the whole person and in turn nourished the richness and depth of tribal communities, culture, and society. To this day, the Wabanaki people look to the land and the waters, both inland and coastal, for physical, mental, and spiritual sustenance as they have done for countless generations. So I'm going to pop back into a screen share and bring my slides back. Alicia, are you able? There we go. Okay, moving slides now. So one of our partners that I thought I would highlight in the spirit of reading that land acknowledgement is the Eastern Woodlands Rematriation Project. They are a grassroots collective led entirely by Indigenous Two-Spirits, Indie queer women, and tribal families in what we now call New England. The Eastern Woodlands Rematriation is a support network for tribal food producers, farmers, medicine keepers, fisher, folk, and hunters. Their website is at the bottom there, rematriate.org. You can check them out to learn a little bit more about the work they are leading to restore some of the traditional food gathering practices of their community. So moving on to talking a little bit about what food security looks like in Maine. You can see the numbers here. At this moment in time, we are at the lowest rate of hunger that we have experienced in the last 20 years. And that's 9.5% of our households being food insecure, which is just about 130,000, just over 130,000 Mainers. And then there's a distinguisher between food insecurity and very low food insecurity. And very low food insecurity means that there have been patterns with skipping meals or modifying a dietary pattern. So that's a worse level of food insecurity, and about 4.5% of Maine households fall into that category, which is above the national average. We look at different subsets of the population. Here in Maine, about 1 in every 6 children is food insecure. And currently we are ranked 14th in the country and 2nd in New England, which isn't all entirely good news, even though, as I said, this is the best position we have been in about 20 years. But I want to quantify that for you a little bit in offering that much of the dip that we have seen in the food insecurity here in Maine has come because of the public health emergency that we have experienced as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the reason that has changed things, it might be sort of counterintuitive that you would think that it might have increased food insecurity levels. But what happened was that there were a number of programs that supported families through the pandemic and continue to be in place because we still are under a public health emergency. And those changes meant that there were several significant increases and changes to the SNAP program, which is used to be called the food stamp program. So there were a number of changes that increased people's allowance of SNAP. And there was another program that was put in place in schools called Pandemic EBT, which meant that during the height of the pandemic, when children were at home because schools were closed, the way that school meals shifted to meet the needs was that rather than children getting their meals at school, families had the dollar amount per meal per child added onto their EBT card. And an EBT card is the card that you use if you access SNAP benefits. And then another really exciting thing that happened that is separate from the public health emergency is that Maine was the 2nd state in the country to pass universal school meals, which means that all children can receive free meals at school. We were a pen stroke behind California. Governor Mills signed that universal school meals bill into effect moments after California did. So we spent a lot of time advocating on that. We had a number of folks who work with us at the Foodbank who showed up and testified and shared their stories as part of the testimonials that brought that legislation to be here in Maine. So what is concerning is that the public health emergency is set to expire at the end of January. The Mills administration has committed to holding it over through the end of February. However, all of the increases to the SNAP program that have brought food security to many families who never imagined that they would be food secure will be lost. Pandemic EBT will go away. And I think we are all familiar with how expensive it is to live in Maine during the winter because of high heating costs, high electricity bills. We are obviously living in a moment of great economic instability and inflation. And so those of us who are close to this work are in a moment, I think, of holding our breath because I have done a lot of work with folks who are living in the crisis of being food insecure, who are living in poverty. And what they told me throughout the pandemic was, this is the first time I could actually feed my family. This was the first time I had enough food. And I don't think that I can quite explain what it feels like for those families to know that in several short months, they will likely be back to where they were pre-pandemic. So we continue to advocate and work with our state and federal legislators in support of maintaining some of these SNAP increases. But we are certainly looking at an uncertain future in the next few months. So what are we doing about this? At the food bank, like I said at the beginning, we think about food today because people are living in a crisis of not having enough food to put on the table to feed their families. And we think about the upstream work that needs to be done to create systemic long-term change. So I mentioned in the beginning, we work with a partner network of 600 different organizations that range from pantry sites to school meal programs to school pantries. We work with healthcare institutions to put food within different healthcare centers so folks can access those. We've worked to help ensure that there is screening for food insecurity. I know that whenever I visit or bring my daughter for her well child visit at Lincoln, they always ask the questions if you've had enough, have you run out of food in the last 12 months? Have you been hungry and not been able to feed your family, and those types of things? So that type of work is happening all the time. We always hold to our core work, which is moving food out the door all across the state. At the beginning, I think I had mentioned that we put out about 29 million meals a year. We also really understand that nutrition is a part of the work, and that we need to be feeding foods that are going to help people thrive. And so we have something called Foods to Encourage at the food bank, which are foods that are sort of put through a filter of quantity of salt, sugar, saturated fats, and sort of rank along a list of foods that we want to encourage for their nutritional value. 79% of the foods that we distribute through the food bank qualify as foods to encourage. And then I also mentioned the capacity building grants, that we understand we are working with a network of partners who are often under-resourced to do this work in their communities, that are built upon volunteer work. And so about $4.2 million of our annual operating budget goes out to partners all across the state to ensure that they have the proper refrigeration, the proper freezers, food safe infrastructure, to make sure that the work that is being done in the community is being done with integrity and dignity. And then we rely heavily on volunteers. We log about 15,000 hours of volunteer work at our distribution centers in a given year. I talked with you a little bit at the beginning about my role as the Vice President of Equity and Impact at the Food Bank. And here is the reason why that work is important. Amidst all of the deep need across our state, when we look at the racial and ethnic demographics, our communities of color are significantly disproportionately impacted by hunger. Newly arriving African immigrants are experiencing food insecurity at 51.6%. That's over half of those communities do not have access to the food that they need. And if you look at Black households compared to white households, they're more than triple the rate of food insecurity for Black Mainers. And you can see there across all different racial and ethnic groups, the disparities. So how do you begin to address that? One step at a time, because it can feel overwhelming. And what I would say is that we have to understand that food insecurity is influenced by things like poverty, unemployment, and household assets. And in this country, and certainly in this state, there has been a long history of racism and structural oppression that has perpetuated these drivers, so that communities of color face much greater disparities around poverty and food insecurity. I've put some resources in here. So if you are interested in understanding a little bit more about that history and some of the data along with it, I'll share this presentation afterwards, and you can look more deeply into that. And then also in Maine here, we've just come through a process of designing what is basically a policy roadmap to end hunger here in Maine. And that came out of the Department of Agriculture and Conservation. And there's a pretty lengthy report that also goes pretty deep on looking at some of the racial disparities around hunger. At the food bank, we are aligning our work with these strategic priorities, so that we can do this long-term systemic change. It is important to us that we help develop and share the awareness of what the root causes of food insecurity are, and keep asking the questions. Why don't people have enough to eat? Why don't people have enough money? And that then we take that information and that awareness, and we funnel it into collaborative and equitable community-driven solutions, which means that we're going into communities and we are seeking the expertise of the people who live in these communities to come up with the solutions, and then we help fund those solutions. We are also committed to closing Maine's meal gap. There's information on that last slide that talks about what the meal gap is, but we intend to close that meal gap by 2025 by improving access to nutritious and culturally relevant foods, and by centering Mainers experiencing food insecurity. So again, one of the things that we are doing now at the food bank that we have not done before is to go to communities of color, different ethnic and racial groups, and to better understand what are the foods that are going to meet their needs. And this past fall, actually, my goodness, it's been over a year now, we started sourcing halal meats, and that has been a game changer for many within the Muslim and the Afghan community, particularly for those Afghan refugees who were recently resettled here, fleeing war and violence in their country, to have access to halal meats. I cannot tell you how many times I've been told what a game changer that has been, because one, meats and proteins are very expensive, and halal meat is very hard to come by in Maine. And then lastly, we understand and we know that this work doesn't happen just outside of us. And so we, and particularly my team, are leading many of the efforts to foster a more equitable and inclusive organizational culture within our own walls, and making sure that none of our own people, our own staff, are experiencing hunger, and that we create a place where many people of diverse backgrounds feel seen, valued, and heard. These are some of the key initiatives that are underway. I will share that community-driven strategies is one of the initiatives that moved through Lincoln County a little more than a year ago. And the community-driven strategies work, Good Shepherd Food Bank will arrive in a region of the state and convene sort of a key group of stakeholders, leaders who are connected to food security work, alongside folks who have lived experience of food insecurity in that community, and lead what has been a year-long process of understanding what are the barriers in the community, what are the challenges, and then working with that group to design solutions that then the food bank supports funding. Again, because there's so much to share here, and I don't want to bog us down in the details of it, I'll share this presentation, and you can click on each of these links and it will bring you to more information about each one of these programs. So I'm going to pause there because I've got another video, and I know from my first go that it wasn't working when I tried. So I might as well give it a try, and let's see what happens here. Yeah, it doesn't want to work. So I'm going to pause us for a second, and I'm going to bring up the other video. And I'm happy, while I'm sort of in the background here driving and pulling up this next video, if there are questions, I know, Alicia, you said to wait till the end, but if we have like a brief intermission while I'm fiddling with video, I can do my best to multitask and answer questions, and also pull up a video. So is anybody sitting out there with a curiosity or a question about anything I've shared so far?
Meg, I just want to say your last video, we couldn't hear the volume.
Get out of town. And nobody yelled at me.
Well, I yelled a little
Rats.
bit.
Shoot.
Okay.
Oh, that's not good. I wonder if that's going to vex us again. Oh, that's such a lovely video. I'm really sorry you didn't get to hear it. Let's see. Any other questions?
And folks, you can unmute yourself, and or you can go directly to the chat box and I can read that question as well. So whatever works best for folks out there tonight.
All right. Alicia, do you know any tricks to volume on Zoom? I'm really wondering why that didn't work with the first video, and I don't want it to be the case with the second one.
You know, I don't. I can grab Annie though.
Exactly what I know how it works. Like I know what it is.
Do we have any wisdom in the community? I feel like if somebody just came off mute and was going to maybe share some wisdom with me about volume on Zoom.
No, I don't remember exactly how to find it.
I've listened to other presentations, and when the speaker has their earbuds in, it does something.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That happened to me before and I forgot.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now I feel good that you'll hear this next video.
Megan, I have a question.
Yeah.
How do the states with the least hunger How do they do it?
That's a great question. I don't have an answer for you right now. I'm really curious about that also. I think that every state approaches it differently. And I also think that if you look at poverty rates, those who are closing the gap are probably states that have less poverty and less food insecurity to begin with. And I think we all know that Maine and rural poverty is a real trick. And I think one of the deep challenges that we face here is that it's unseen. And COVID actually really pulled back, so we could see where hunger existed, because so many food pantry models actually shut down or went to like a drive-through model distribution where families would come and they'd put a box in the trunk. But many also realized we have to get out into the community and we have to get to people, which is really something that we should always be doing, because there are folks who, for lots of different reasons, transportation barriers, mobility issues, cannot be moving about. And so there are lots and lots of long dirt roads in Maine, right, that we never see the end of. And there's this also, I think there's a real strong feeling of self-reliance here in this state, and a feeling of pride and able to take care of oneself, and to show up and to ask for help is a really courageous act. And I think sometimes we have created a culture of shame and embarrassment around that, rather than fostering a culture of community and sharing that just doesn't allow people. I can't tell you the number of times I've worked with folks who are deep in the crisis of poverty and food insecurity, and they will say to me, somebody else needs it more than I do. That's a very, very big truth for many. And I will tell you about a dear friend who I know, who lived in the woods of Maine through a winter in a tent. And when I met him, he showed me, he said that winter, he said, this belt that I'm wearing, he added 7 notches on his belt because he was literally starving and he didn't have a way to get to a food pantry. And I think that there was a little bit of that sense of that he could take care of himself and others needed more. So I know much more about the challenges I think that we have here in Maine, probably less about states who are not struggling in the same ways or with hunger in the same way that we are. But thank you for that question. I thought was there another hand up, or maybe that was just from that one. All right. Well, I'm gonna shift gears now, because I've always really believed that we can all make a difference, and that sometimes we get stuck behind thinking it won't be enough. And I've just decided to free myself of that false idea and to just do, right? To not fear inaction. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that my partner and I do at the Twin Villages Foodbank Farm. And I would be remiss, actually, as I was putting this presentation together today, when we started the farm 7 years ago, there was a really special person who was connected with Coastal Rivers at the time, who was also near and dear to you all at the boat shop. And I see him on my screen. So I have to acknowledge Bobby Ives for being an advocate for us, for myself, for my partner. And, it's sort of weird to sell something to somebody before it exists, and to have somebody show up and believe in you because of who you are, and to champion your idea when all that you can look out at is a blank field and there's nothing there, and to say, no, you really ought to get behind these folks. That was what Bobby offered to Sarah and I. And so when I was thinking about, obviously, what he has done for so many in this community, and particularly through the Carpenter's Boat Shop, I thought, wow, we share that. And so I know all of you who connect deeply with the Carpenter's Boat Shop understand the impact that Bobby has had in our community. And I just wanted to thank you and appreciate you, Bobby. So, and hopefully in celebration of that, there's going to be audio on this video that I will share next. So let's see if we can do it. There is going to be a little bit of an ad here because I don't know how to skip it. So Alicia, can you hear it?
We can. Yes.
Sweet.
Fantastic.
Oh, that's great. So we're going to learn about t-shirts here, and then we're going to learn about the farm.
Do good. Because when you purchase one, we donate one.
It's important because we need it for the people who need the good food, who can't easily get it from the stores. And it's good for the people that are in our community.
I'm Sarah Coffin, and we're at Twin Villages Foodbank Farm in Damerscata. We farm 3 acres of vegetables, all for donation in Lincoln County, and then we also collect food at our food storage hub for distribution throughout the county as well. The food storage hub is available to any nonprofit. Any pantry can use it in town. So we probably work with about 10 groups, nonprofits and pantries and schools. The storage hub lets us fill in a gap where there is a lot of food in our community that goes to waste, whether that be from grocery stores or excess food at farms. And so it was just a solution to be right here to collect as many of those calories as we can to get them back out in the community. And it really feels like it worked like we'd hoped.
The farm is an obvious role for us. I mean, we need local food to distribute to the share tables and other places, right? Distribution sites. But the hub is not only the place where we pick up the food that the farm provides, it also is a place where I utilize the shared cold storage, for example. It's also the place where I get my tables, tablecloths, baskets, and food ready for my volunteers, and then they can go set up the shared tables, which are far and wide throughout the county. So the hub is providing the centralized place where we all have our individual roles in the food security world, yet we've got the shared vision that the hub represents, just getting more food to more people. But the fact is, it just increases everybody's efficiencies, increases everybody's productivity, so that we're all able to leverage each other's efforts here and just look forward to what's next, for Lincoln County.
My role is through the YMCA, and I'm the Director of Outreach as part of my role. So I try to make sure that I'm connecting with our community partners so that all the needs of a family is met. And oftentimes it is food insecurity. So the farm and the hub has been an amazing partnership for the Y. So the hub is a building that's across the street from the CLC YMCA. Meg and Sarah reached out and said, hey, I know you're busy and I know you have a lot that you're juggling. Feel free to use our space if you need to store anything. And a lot of what I do at the Y is I do food drives called Fill the Y Bus. And we would fill the bus with donations. And in order to either have just a resting space until food pantries could pick those up, or individual families would call and have a need. That space was nice because then the vegetables that were in cold storage could also supplement boxes of shelf-stable food that we could make sure food boxes got to families.
I would say here in Lincoln County, we're very lucky to be in a place that cares for one another. I would say our community members really do look for ways to give back. And I think our food storage hub is just a perfect example of that. The Coastal Rivers Conservation Trust offered the space for free. And we've had a lot of people come together to make that space happen so that everyone can utilize it to benefit the most people.
Has your 9 to 5 become 24/7? Backcountry took one customer.
All right. Well, I'm glad that the audio could work that time. I'm going to plug back in now, and then we'll resume the last few slides of the presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions. All right, so So hopefully that video gave you some context to help you understand that we operate both a farm and a food distribution hub through Twin Villages Foodbank Farm. And none of this really would have happened without the generosity of Coastal Rivers Conservation Trust. When we approached their director, Stephen Huffnagel, 8 years ago and said, we have this idea, he said, that's great. I've really wanted people to farm this land for a long time because historically it's always been farmed to feed the community. And we walked these fields, we marked them off, and now we actively grow on about 2 acres every year, but we grow very intensively through a way that we sort of grow tightly close together, and we amend the soils with lots of different nutrients, compost and otherwise. So we yield anywhere from 40 to 50,000 pounds of food off of about 2 acres every season. And that goes direct for donation to all of Lincoln County food pantries and a lot of youth programs as well. So you can see on the map there, the distribution of food pantries that we work alongside in the community. And really, we have a few key areas that we focus on. Obviously, the first is growing. Production was always our goal, was to be a farm that was really by and for the community, and that everything that would be grown at the farm would go straight into the community for folks who really needed the food. And I will say, actually, I'll say that as we talk about the hub space here, a couple of things that we recognized when we started doing this 7 years ago was that during the growing season, there's actually a lot of really lovely farmers in this local community who donate product to food pantries. And so there's sort of this abundance in the summer. And then when fall and winter hit, a lot of folks here in Maine lose employment because of seasonal jobs dropping off. And as the days get shorter and darker and colder, utility expenses go up. So food pantries generally see an uptick in folks coming to the pantry in the winter months. And that's right about the time that fresh food drops off. And so we adapted our growing plan to ensure that we were growing a lot of root storage crops that would hold into the winter months so we could keep fresh produce coming into the food pantries. And once we did that, we realized we needed a space to hold them. And that's when we went back to Stephen Huffnagel at Coastal Rivers. We talked about some storage space in the bottom of the Darrow's barn. And then we started raising grant funds to renovate that space into a food safe storage facility. And we built out a cold storage space, which on the picture on the left with the onions, that's myself and my daughter at the height of COVID, trying to get as much food in and out as we could. But that sort of white paneled wall to our left is the cold storage space. And on the right, you'll see that's a delivery coming in from Good Shepherd Food Bank, particularly during COVID when they had lots of when there was sort of excess produce. We were taking in as much as we could just to get it out into the community as fast as we could. And so it was really great to be able to partner with folks like them. We also have a great partnership with Healthy Lincoln County, and there's a woman, Jess Braithrup, who works for them, who can harangue like food from anywhere. And so she'll often get deliveries from folks like Northeast Transport who get turned away when they make deliveries to Hannaford for whatever reason. And then that food will come into the storage hub. So we end up aggregating and distributing about another 30,000 pounds of reclaimed food that would otherwise, I don't know where it would end up, but rather than going where I don't know it would go, it goes to the homes of people here in Lincoln County. And then lastly, I think so much of our work has been successful because of all of the partnerships in the community. The top left picture is Leslie Wicks from Farms at the Y, which is Farms is focused on agriculture in rural Maine schools. They operate under the CLC YMCA now. They come out whenever we host students at the farm, and they will do a field demonstration of cooking. So the students work in the fields, and then they come and they do a cooking lesson with Farms right there. So they have sort of the whole experience from the farm to the table, all in just about an hour. And then a really exciting development that just came online last year, that center picture is a greenhouse that was put up at the Great Salt Bay School. Prior to having this greenhouse, we were actually raising all of our seedlings in the spring up in Unity because there was some commercial greenhouse space that we were able to rent up there, but it was a terribly inefficient use of our time and gas to drive up there. And now the students at Great Salt Bay start all of the seedlings. So they're really even extending their experience with the farm from starting the seedlings to coming out to planting them, and they'll come back and harvest and have the opportunity to cook with farms. And then Farms at the Y has done some processing and made soups and stuff that have gone into food pantries in the past. And that's the other picture you see there. So that, there's so much more we could talk about, but I'm really interested to hear from you all, hear what questions you have. So I'm gonna stop sharing here and bring us all back together. Man, I've never actually used all of the presentation time before when I've done something like this, but hopefully we'll have a few minutes and folks either have questions or curiosities or something to add to the conversation based on your own experience. So is that what we do now, Alicia? Is that right?
It sounds perfect. And folks, again, can put it in the chat box, or you can take yourself off of mute and ask Meg directly. So before questions start, Megan, I just want to say thank you. That was, this is one of the most meaningful speaker series that I've participated in. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for inviting us in.
Absolutely. I have a question for you. This is wonderful. And do you know whether there are any analogies to the Twin Villages hub to other countries or counties in Maine? Are there?
Oh, is this happening in other places?
Yeah, exactly.
In terms of hub models, there is some energy around hubs. I don't know quite in the way that we have imagined it here. There are different sort of food hubs doing different types of work. I know up in Unity, they had tried to sort of get one off the ground, but that was much more aggregating from lots of different farms and not necessarily to go into what we refer to as the charitable food network. I will say that when we got started, there's a lovely group of folks down in the Brunswick area who started chatting with us because they wanted to start a farm similar to what we were doing. And they have just done an incredible job. They're called Growing to Give. And they're based down in Brunswick. And we really, we actually took several visits when we were developing our model. And we visited Gaining Ground in Boston, and that's a really remarkable farm that's doing great work in sort of the Boston metro area with some really cool folks who are just organizing and running that operation there. You know, and I think what we've thought before is that, like, wouldn't it be cool if we could just replicate this, right? If we could pick it up and bring it to other communities, and I think it could be done. But the fact of the matter is, I really believe that when you do work in a community, it has to be very responsive to the conditions on the ground in that community. And so it would require a deep understanding of that community. What are the assets? What are the challenges? We have been so fortunate here in the Mid-Coast area to really tap into the generosity of the community that lives here. I never could have imagined developing a donor base where we had donors from all across the country. Like, it blew my mind. And then I realized that there are people who come to Maine from all over this country, and they care deeply about this place. Even when we give them that cold shoulder of being from away, they still care about what's happening here. And so I just remember sitting down with Sarah at one of our first appeals and going through and being like really confused why there were envelopes that were addressed to California. And I mean, probably one of all of the states. And then I just realized, wow, like, people see this amazing thing and they just care so deeply. And really, we run the farm on the generosity of the community. And I don't want to say we're doing it on a hope and a prayer, because I think it's more sound than that. I think we actually have a pretty good financial model, but much of our operating depends on the folks who live here or visit here. So, and we're 7 years in. So I have a deep belief in this community to do good things.
I have another question for you, Meg.
Yes.
My question is a thought experiment with regards to the availability of nutritional whole foods throughout the year. How much of a game changer would it be if there was an infinite amount of freezer space available at the hub?
That is a good question. And it's one that we have actually thought on before. And I really credit my partner, Sarah. We're so different in our leadership approach. And she really, I'm like, I want the plan. I want it painted done. And then I want to like design to that picture. And she's so thoughtful in paying attention to what is happening and what the needs are, and really being deep in relationship and understanding. So we've been sort of waiting and anticipating to know if there could be a need that would really, because the cost of renovating that basement space was no small potatoes. And so what we did do is that we framed out. So if you can imagine this hub space, we framed out a double door because we thought, who knows, if you build it, they will come, like that mentality. And so we framed out a door so that we have sort of a secondary footprint that could connect to the existing food hub. I think there's some really interesting work happening at Good Shepherd Foodbank that I will talk about that relates to that idea of frozen product, because our growing season in Maine is so very short. And we operate a program at the food bank called Mainers Feeding Mainers, and we contract with about 80 farmers across the state who grow for pantries, not all like we do. Like they may have some of their seconds that go into their Mainers Feeding Mainers contract and then get delivered to pantries. I think we're really the only farm that's growing all for donation in the way that we are. But Good Shepherd Food Bank, I think, picked up on the same idea, and we have actually just launched a subsidiary business called Harvesting Good. And we are working in partnership with Wyman's, like the folks who do the frozen blueberries. The blueberry season is very, very short, and they only use their processing facility for a very short period of time in the year. And we thought, what if we partnered with them? We extended the season and we trialed a product. And so right now we're working with Circle B Farms, and we just blanched our first batch of frozen broccoli florets. It will be a retail product. And then hopefully the profit from that will feed back into our charitable work. And if it proves to be a workable solution, we could expand to other products. And that could be done at scale because of the equipment that we're working with. And we can hold on the folks who come to work for the blueberry season and who are in the processing. We can now keep them employed longer, which is really, really exciting. You can read up on that. There was a really great press release recently.
Meg, 2025, it's rapidly approaching.
Yeah.
Do you think the goal to eliminate food insecurity here can be reached?
Yeah, so I think organizationally, we always think aspirationally, and it is not to end food insecurity, it is to close the meal gap. And so those two things are a little bit different, because we know that we could look at just how many meals are needed based on the people that we know have need, and we can move that much food and we would still have hunger, because we have not done the work to eradicate poverty and some of those drivers that I talked about. And so no, there will still be people who are experiencing hunger in this state beyond 2025. And it is why we need to double down our efforts in our root cause work and our advocacy work, and why we need to be partnering with folks across sector. And right now, I didn't say this, but at the food bank, we are in the process of a year-long development of a strategic plan. And we are taking a full year to develop that, because we are engaging many people all across the community and in different sectors who work sort of adjacent to us, but our work overlaps and interconnects. And so our hope is that it's actually a little over a year, that we will have a comprehensive strategic plan that is really, really thoughtfully created and fed with inputs from folks who are sort of out working in different areas, whether it's poverty reduction, housing, education, healthcare, and that our strategic plan will reflect strategies that really work and think collaboratively.
Joanne, I see that you raised your hand. I was wondering if you had a question for me.
That's my mom.
That's your mom. Fantastic.
She's going to have a tough one, maybe. Oh, no. Mom, did you have a question? My dad's shaking his head no. She might have accidentally raised her hand.
All right.
I'll give her a call later.
Yeah. So I want to give folks another opportunity to ask Meg a few more questions. And here we go. Okay, Meg, over the past decade, ending hunger and increasing food sovereignty for Mainers in the New England region has been identified as major goals of government policy and regional organizations, addressing food insecurity within the content of climate change. One of the stretch goals, providing half the food for the New England region by 2060, will require quadrupling of Maine's farmland area. How will we do this?
That somebody expects me to have that answer. Huh?
I'll give you his email tomorrow.
That's great. Well, I think what I can say is, are a couple things. I don't know that I can answer that that question specifically. Climate change is obviously a reality that we and all farmers are up against. One of the things, I think it's going to take a vast adaptation of our growing practices. And you may start to hear some language around regenerative agriculture. And what's really important about that model of farming is that it allows us to grow more intensively, to yield more food in smaller spaces. Maine is not a really good state to grow in because we have really rocky soils and we don't have lots of open space. My partner, Sarah, comes from the Midwest, where I had never been to the Midwest before we were married, but when we landed, I mean, you can see for miles, right? I can go for a jog and I'm like, man, when you can see 10 miles out, going for a jog feels really overwhelming. But what I would say is that we have to adapt our growing practices. We use something called a no-till method, where we're really building our soils. And if you want to read about regenerative ag and no-till farming, it's a carbon sequestration model where when you build your soils, you can actually trap carbon in the soils. And if we can be successful in scaling that model here, I think that we can look at European models who are far ahead of us. There are ways that, I don't think we're going to round the corner on where we see climate change heading, but absolutely, there are things we can do to change our practices. You can also retain water in those soils better. So when we have drought years like we have in the past couple of years, if your soil tilth is healthy, you can retain what little moisture we are getting. And then I would say we've got some really smart, innovative folks in this state who, and really wonderful farmers. So I think that Maine can be a contributor to creating some of these solutions. Oh, my mom is asking if there are restrictions or criteria to be eligible to access community food pantries and food banks. So a little bit about the relationship between Good Shepherd Food Bank and the Food Pantry Network. We provide guidelines, and we have representatives across the state who work in regions to sort of be checking in with food pantries in those communities. And we will always say that nobody should be restricted at any food pantry. That is sort of our best practice and guidance. And yet we know we have food pantries who limit access, who will only serve folks from within their community. And we are, it is within our work to try to keep building the dignity of experience at all food pantries and to work with communities to understand and to operate from a mindset of abundance rather than scarcity. So I don't say this to shame folks who are trying to just meet the needs of their community. I think that they're really well-intentioned folks who are really nervous that there's just not enough. And I think that mentality of scarcity really limits the possibilities. And when we can free ourselves of that, we can free ourselves of the fear that there's not enough, then we can better meet the needs of everyone. Thanks, Mom. It's a good question.
Last call for questions. All right. Meg, awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah. So educational. And I so appreciate you being here this evening. All of you folks out there on that beautiful Zoom, thank you so much for being here with us. And I can share, are you going to share the slides with me, Meg?
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
Great. If folks are interested, you know how to reach me, and I'll share them with you happily. And thank you for a lovely night.
Thanks so much, Alicia. It's great to be with you all. I really appreciate it. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, you all. I've got the dog. It's lovely to see you, Lisa and Chris. Hi, Bobby.
Hi, Alicia. Big hello from Nico.
Oh, how's he doing?
He's doing well.
Yeah.
He's got all kinds of sailing stories for you.
Is this year 2 at MMA?
Yeah.
Wow. Holy smokes.
Yeah. He'll be home in a couple of days.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanksgiving. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, it's lovely to see you both. And I'm in close touch with Debbie too, which is lovely.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I think we're going to get up to throw a bowl.
Oh yeah. Good. I have a like a traditional lathe pole lathe class coming up, but then also my friend Nikki, who I worked with at Outward Bound, she's going to come and teach on the electric lathes. So you let me know what you want, and I will get the two of you a lesson with either Zach, or with Nikki. So mostly because I'd love to see all of you. So I can make it happen.
All right.
Yeah. Yes. All right. Well, be very well. Thanks for being here and supporting us, staying in touch. So I greatly appreciate it.
Hope you have a great Thanksgiving too.
Yeah, you as well. Have a nice night.